when they realize that other people can read the mind, especially children, it's frightening.
We're capable of much more than we even know.
We have a power of thought. We can change our environment, affect other people just by thinking or even breathing.
Dr. Iya Whiteley. She has a PhD in cognitive engineering and 25 years spent exploring human performance at the edge of capability. She spent decades designing training for astronauts, advising space agencies. How can Dr. Whiteley's wisdom inform how we see telepathy, the possibility of aliens, the possibility of a field of consciousness where every soul is reachable through a plane of, guess what, love?
Extraordinary things happen.
Are there experiences that astronauts are afraid to talk about?
Astronauts were trying to understand what they were perceiving. Ghost in the cockpit. That's what people were calling things that were happening with the aircraft. I would ask them, where did you get that information? And I knew they didn't get it in flight. They intuited the number. As soon as we let go, the opportunity opens, the perceptual capacity.
Is there a set of skills that is innate to all of us that we simply need to hone?
It's not far off to say that.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. What if the wisdom of astronauts and cosmonauts could give us a window into the nature of consciousness, special abilities, perception, even what we might dismiss as coincidence? Is there a way of seeing the world that opens up the possibility for seeing the unseen in the world? Who better to answer these questions than Dr. Iya Whiteley? She spent decades designing training for astronauts, advising space agencies. Dr. Whiteley has a PhD in cognitive engineering and 25 years spent exploring human performance at the edge of capability. But as Jonathan and I talk about at Mayim Bialik's Breakdown all the time, we're capable of much more than we even know. How can Dr. Whiteley's wisdom about our capabilities inform how we see telepathy, the possibility of aliens, the possibility of a field of consciousness where every piece of information and every soul that has ever existed and ever will exist is reachable through a plane of, guess what, love? All of this comes together in such a beautiful way. We're going to also talk about born knowing, how children arrive as natural masters of presence. And she teaches a bunch of courses around this. But we're going to focus our conversation with Dr. Whiteley on extraterrestrial phenomenon, a consciousness field, and 150 kinds of synesthesia. We are capable of so much more than we realize. Dr. Whiteley is going to break it all down. Dr. Iya Whiteley, welcome to the Breakdown.
Break it down.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So we've introduced you using your bio and some of the incredible work that you do. But I wonder if you could explain kind of in your own words, what role have you played? What role do you play in our understanding in particular of the boundaries of space and our capacity to exist in it?
I'm interested in human performance, so I'm more interested in what our capacity and capability is. And that's what took me, I guess, from one task to another, and eventually working with pilots and then developing technology and tools to support astronauts and developing training, something that would tap into our tools. And that is my current and I guess ongoing interest on what kind of inner tools that we have that we can take anywhere and, without taking a backpack.
I think of the work of Temple Grandin and how she intuitively understood things about, in her particular case, animals and an aspect of autism that allowed her to sort of increase capability and increase ability for an aspect that many people didn't understand. Where does your particular interest, expertise, and intuition come into understanding these kinds of systems?
I think it is self-discovery, and I would encourage everyone to tap in. And mostly it comes from putting ourselves into all sorts of precarious situations to discover what we're capable of. And that was my interest as well in diving into working with people who, for some reason, self-select to put themselves in challenging and difficult situations that they would just wanted to see, can I do it? Or it's like, the curiosity drove the cat. Let's say it's still alive.
I wonder if you can give us some specific examples of some of the work that you've done to help us understand the exceptional situation that people who are tasked with traveling into space find themselves in.
So what was interesting to me is when astronauts, putting themselves into a situation, including pilots, they go into places like landing in Antarctica and unprepared runways. And so it's not your typical commercial flight, but it's sort of taking off into space or a medium that we actually not prepared to survive. Should we not have something mechanical surrounding us, or even a piece of cloth, above our head, to land afterwards? And I was wondering, how do they feel going into it? Is it scary? Is it exciting? Is it, why, do we put ourselves through that? And when asked that question, and a number of astronauts and cosmonauts, they said, we feel like superheroes when we, go up to the rocket. And I said, why? And they said, well, it's because of our instructors and all the support system that we have. So instructors do all sorts of scenarios that would potentially prepare them be prepared for unthinkable, for the scenarios that will probably never, ever come up. But because we went mentally through that, when we do come to the situation, we're not frozen, which is our first reaction to unexpected or somewhere where we can move. So they almost train over that surprise factor. And I thought that's amazing, that you go in, to be blasted off and literally exploded into space, or going into an aircraft that, should something go wrong, it's not like you can land it everywhere. Even the helicopter, it's not, although it will have the rotation to go down, that it still needs to be somewhere safe to land. So I wanted to understand what are they coming into. And when I was working with pilots, when I just began, I understood that I actually need to think like they are in order to cognitively appreciate and design system for them. And this is a luxury to learn to fly. It's expensive, but I thought I can't do it. So in my graduate school, I actually started learning. And part of that, when you get to work with pilots, they're a curious bunch. And one way to kind of learn to fly and actually have the experience, I was in the United Arab Emirates at the start, and there was a Russian Sukhoi airplane, which is an aerobatic plane that would, it will go into positions that you wouldn't want to be flying in if you aren't prepared. And I was. And so they said, if you polish the cockpit with the glass, which gets blasted with sand because of the, where it is, it gets scratched quite quickly. So I would polish it, and the heat is like 40 degrees up to 50. And anyway, so because I polished it, I had a chance to go up. And I wanted to understand how, why would they put an aircraft, in unsupported positions? So, for example, this particular pilot was a South African aerobatic team. And so let's say you're flying with your wings level, and then suddenly, literally, like you can't even think of a split second, but suddenly it would be completely like that, so you would think it would just drop down. But for some reason, on this little blades that are right at the front, it kept propelling forward, and that will go completely inverted and then twist again. And I think it's I don't know. I've asked, what drives you, and there wasn't an answer of why would he do that? Why would he do that? And that particular pilot, he was also a deep sea diver. So he would go, commercial deep sea diver. So they will go for weeks at a time without coming up into a canister, several, I think it's 100 meters of down. So, and they would breathe a specific gas that will make your voice sound funny. So they would not even talk to each other much because it will make them sound, and you can't really talk on topics, and you also rotate. So people who are inside sleeping and those who are outside are working, and it's kind of an interesting lifestyle. And then he would come back up, right, to the surface, and he will go up doing aerobatic flights. And that's the life of a person. And I thought that's such an interesting way of spend your time on Earth, exploring these dimensions of, I don't know, being in unusual situations where you can't really survive without the equipment. But so I was just interested on how they think. And so I pursued flying to understand that.
Did you complete a pilot's license?
Yes, I've completed a private pilot license and gained a night flying license, because that's also a different type of perception, and it feels like you've got the sky above and below. If you've got a city lights, well, not city, but like not more dispersed lighting, you can't quite, well, you can tell obviously where the ground and the sky is, but it feels like there is this space between. And only when I was able to fly, the pilots actually began opening up and talking. Otherwise, my work, detangling of what they're thinking and I would ask them, for example, how is your landing? How was your landing? What were the difficulties? What were you thinking? Where are you looking? And none of those questions, I couldn't get any answers. And so the question I would have, like, how did your landing go? And they say, fine. And my task was to compare a cockpit with an analog display, which was a C-130 Hercules, which is like a massive cargo airplane, and it will have clock dials. So this is like year 2000, and Australian Air Force was swapping for an completely new glass cockpit where all of the screens and computers are, and they were looking for what would be the difference in performance, because the Lockheed Martin was stating that they could have fewer people in the cockpit, which is, of course, reduces force, people in the cockpit, but they were convinced that they don't need those extra minds, or human wit in the cockpit as they do the operation. And so I was the youngest on the team because I was a student, but we were collecting data, and I just couldn't get much out of the pilots. They would say, how was the landing? And they would say it was fine. It's like, well, how fine? I didn't have the vocabulary, but as soon as I started flying, I was able to say, well, how did that feel? How did you position? Where did you look? And it suddenly started making sense because I could see what they were processing. And that was my joy, I guess, to dive into these peculiarities on what sparks your intuition into the next action.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Our Ritual.
Our Ritual. This is not your parents' couples therapy. This is a modern approach, blending weekly sessions with licensed experts and science-based digital exercises that you do on your own right in the app between sessions.
I'm going to say right here that while I love therapy. I have always said it needs an extra component. How come we're not practicing? Once a week isn't enough. It's about implementing what we learn and the insights we get to expedite the change.
Well said, Jonathan. No couch, no pressure, no pretending everything's fine. All you do is start by answering a few questions, and then our ritual is going to match you with an expert who actually gets your situation. You meet weekly, together or separately with your partner. And here's the thing, in between sessions, our ritual offers self-guided work via the app. Videos, exercises tailored just for you. Only one of you ready? I've never been in that situation. Totally fine. Busy life? Sessions can be 20 or 40 minutes. Experts around the world means flexible scheduling that actually works. And the best part, costs a lot less than traditional therapy, starting at just $32 a week.
I'm going to say something that may blow your mind. Who you are most connected with is the largest influence on how your life is going to go. Why not work on it?
Learn how to communicate without blowing up, break out of the same old conflict loops, reconnect emotionally, navigate parenting, navigate being long distance from your partner. What is an emotional trigger? Learn about them. From conflict mastery and emotional intimacy to rebuilding after infidelity, our ritual helps you do the work between sessions so progress doesn't stop when the call ends. That's where the real change happens. Our ritual delivers way more than just talk, whether you're a couple, an individual, a parent, LGBTQ, figuring things out from a distance. Our ritual meets you where you are. Real support, real tools, real change on your terms. Also, unlike traditional therapy, our ritual app offers video series and exercises in between sessions. Members do the work, make progress independently, which contributes to overall progress. The video series discusses a variety of topics. For example, love after kids, helping you navigate a new normal growing as parents and partners. Choosing Me video series helps individuals build a better relationship with themselves, from setting boundaries and creating healthy relationship patterns to moving from self-doubt to self-trust. Really anything you need, please go to ourritual.com, answer a short questionnaire, use the coupon code BREAKER20 for 20% off your first month. That's ourritual.com, code BREAKER20 for 20% off your first month.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Optimizers.
Listen up. We're very excited to share with you our new nighttime ritual. We kept hearing about Magnesium Breakthrough by Optimizers from fitness enthusiast friends, and everybody said the same thing. This is different. Most magnesium supplements only have 1 or 2 forms, but this one combines 7 different forms of magnesium, plus cofactors to help your body better absorb and use it. So we finally decided to see what is all the hype about. Well, the benefits that people mention: better sleep, feeling calmer, better recovery from workouts, even better digestion. But honestly, I wanted to experience it myself before we talked about it with all of you in our MBB audience. So here's my challenge to you. I dare you to try it. Track your sleep, notice how you feel, see if you wake up more refreshed. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. And here's the thing, Optimizers is so confident in their products that they offer a 365-day, no questions asked money-back guarantee. 0 risk. Join us over the next month. I'll be documenting my experience and reporting back here, and I can't wait to share what happens. Go to buyoptimizers.com/breaker. Use our exclusive code BREAKER for 15% off. That's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/breaker, code BREAKER for 15% off. 2026 is the year you finally start sleeping great again. When I think about, for example, like competitive athletes, we know that there's something different about them. And often it's something different physiologically. It's a different distribution of, let's say, slower, fast twitch fibers. Or, Michael Phelps has this kind of webbing, right? Supposedly he's got this, ridiculous arm span. And there's all these very special things that make athletes, in many cases, particularly suited to what they do. What can you tell us about, in particular, people who go into space, people who dedicate their lives into that kind of travel? What is it about them spiritually or conceptually that makes them maybe more open to these experiences or more comfortable in the places that many of us would not be?
That's, a question, I guess, a lot of astronauts gets asked is that why did you choose it, or what inspired you? And I think a beautiful example is Alexei Leonov, who was the first person to walk in space. So he did the first spacewalk. And I happened to have a conversation with him, and I asked him, why did you start flying? And he said, I wanted to see the clouds closer, because at that time there was no space flight when he began. And he's actually driven by art. So he's an artist at the start, and he wanted to draw and capture his fascination with what clouds are. And I guess there was not much description of what the clouds were at the time when he was younger. So he wanted to just be among the clouds because he wanted to draw them. And that's how he became a pilot, and then a pilot who was, working on special planes. And then he got selected to go to space. And he was in space. He developed a method on how we, to date, when the seasons change, the color change in agricultural settings. And so he was the first one to bring colored pencils into space and actually colored on how the changes were happening across, I guess, the fields of view that he could observe. And that's when the Earth observation direction became. And because he had special color perception as an artist, he brought that in, I guess, that talent. And I found when speaking with astronauts, a lot of them are multi-talented. Majority of them play an instrument. A lot of them, would do different kinds of sports. They could be engineers, but they will have a flair for, philosophy or arts. And if they, sometimes they come from arts. Well, there are medical flow, right? People who are medical professionals, but also there are technical people. But no matter whom you cross, they are thriving to solve a challenge. There's no task small enough. I guess the Soviet aspect of the cosmonauts, they would say that they have to repair all the equipment in the house before they go up, because as soon as they leave the house, something will go wrong in the house. And so there is always like a backup family, and they live in Star City, and they look after each other, because as soon as, they used to be majority, actually until very, very recently, they were mostly men in USSR and Russian Federation, the cosmonaut corps. And so something would go wrong, but they would always repair and do everything by hand, because of course in space you can't, call a plumber or somebody else, but also what's interesting is they are equally really good at following instructions and being so clear on detail oriented as also driving the situation or the problem solving. So it's quite interesting to have this, in a sense, leadership and also humbleness and appreciation of the team. That's quite interesting too.
I had a good friend who was a 5-time world champion kickboxer, and she described that when she was fighting, she would lose sense of time and space, and there was a part of her brain that started to operate purely from instinct. And when she thought back to the fight, some of them she couldn't remember, and it was only in the moment right before a knockout where she would snap to and have an awareness of whether or not she should strike or not. And I'm curious about the extrasensory perception that happens in high pressure situations, and what you've learned about people developing an extra sense or multiple senses to either be aware of incoming danger. What insight have you gleaned about additional senses for people in these situations?
This is usually not explored in kind of classical science, but I have been always interested, and that was my interest grown from martial art, because you rely on your spider senses or extrasensors or, your vision and perception behind you. And we did a lot of work with eyes closed and also having kind of, contact where you don't lose contact, but you had to guess and work together in seeing, determining the flow without pushing or pulling. And that gave me an interest in understanding how do I know where, what this person is likely to do next. And also what is interesting in that perception, if we are worried, if we've got a sense of fear, then the perception narrows and there is a gap in our spider sense or in our perceptual capacity, whatever we may call it, extrasensory perception, intuition, interoception in some capacity. And so I found that, and similar with astronauts that we discussed before, like, there's no fear, there is no, it's a healthy risk management. And as soon as we become worried, we seem to unable to almost like take that extrasensory perception. And I don't know, have you met Dean Radin?
We haven't, but we've spoken to a lot of people in extrasensory abilities and psi phenomenon and telepathy.
Cool. So that bunch, from IONS, and they have done experiments about perception, and that our body to different capacity can predict what would be the next event in milliseconds upfront. And it's different from so our brain waves that we can measure, encephalogram, cardiogram, and also galvanic skin response. And so that was interesting to me also to understand on how can we extend that time perception, widen that gap of how can we do it. And I've actually did put a grant together, which I never thought will go through. But it did go through, but I felt pregnant, and it didn't. I wasn't able. I had high expectation that I'll have the baby and do the contract and work perfectly well. But that was first time being a mom, and that was not realistic. So that did not happen. So there was a people who are dismantling dangerous equipment that could blow up or in the field, and they were clearly successful because they were doing it over and over, and they did not know how to teach that, because also the training is so challenging that people who would come to train would with time will leave the training because they would understand the seriousness and the problem of what they're getting into, that they wanted to know, for one, to find the capability of something that you can't predict, that intuitive sense of what to do despite, I guess, the pressure, the circumstance, and also reading the clues that you don't know what are the clues. And so the idea was to get into and maybe extend those tests that they did at IONS and repeated across the globe on that millisecond prediction of doing it or not doing it. And how does this work? And so, and tapping into those sensations and allowing other people to scan for the clues. Because part of our previous work was to do designing problem-solving tools for long-duration missions. And the idea is that people have to solve problems with minimum resources. And what that entails is that we need to be systematic, but also be creative and be open to opportunity. And if we can be systematic in creativity, which sounds awkward, right? How could you be systematic in creativity? But it's almost like you direct your attention to one field at a time and allow the time for creativity to unfold before you move on to the next thing. Because our mind has this capacity, sort of, once you've got the solution, that's done. I don't want to be working anymore on that. But in actual fact, if we can be systematic, we can work out the solutions and then find the more practical or the one that we have resources rather than just having one. So that was the idea. And part of that, I wanted to merge the part of that inner innate sensing plus the systematic observation skills. So I wanted to see if they do have that scan intuitively so. And the idea is to use that pre-verbal knowing, which I was using for designing aircraft cockpits, and allowing the people to articulate the intuition. So something that we deeply know, but don't know how to explain, or we don't even realize we know. But or we think everybody knows it, it's a common sense, which often it isn't.
Well, I think this is one of the most interesting and applicable areas, is having a deep knowing or a sense of knowing, or being able to anticipate something that may happen either milliseconds or further in the future. And how do we develop that? And I think people who are listening, there's a mix. Some people who are deep down the rabbit hole of developing their extra senses, and some people who are listening to this conversation for the first time and trying to make sense of, is this really possible? How does it work on a practical level? I hear people who talk about intuition, but I can't really figure it out. So I want to try and walk through this. And I think one way to do that would be to hear a little bit more about your personal experience. I've heard you talk about Aikido, which is a martial arts, but you can describe a little bit about what it is and how you started to develop this, as you call it, spidey sense. And that will take us, I think, into how it progresses for people, like what's possible in practicing this martial arts and how it translates to our everyday lives.
Good point. Everybody should do martial art, I think, and find their, inspiration from the spirit of art, because it's about exploration of, who we are, and also collaborating with the environment. And what I loved about Aikido is that it was about, first of all, observation, and then allowing things to happen without forcing or intervening. And it was allowing to take what's coming and work with that. And I thought the whole concept of being it's not non-judgmental, but allowing for whatever motion to happen and just join with that flow and work with that flow. And that not knowing of what will happen, despite having some, moves that we would learn. But the idea is that you then, once you practice them, you're watching where the energy would take you, and you would be intuitively following, especially if there is a weight difference, of whoever is coming onto you, and allowing for that to circle. And the idea is that you look for where the energy would want to go, meaning the weight, for example, or speed or momentum, and where you can carry it in such a way that it's deflecting.
And if someone has not ever seen Aikido, I'll try to explain it to them and you can correct me. It's unlike other martial arts, you're not like going through and practicing or demonstrating. My understanding of it is that you're in an interaction with someone comes towards you, so that's the motion coming towards you, and you transfer that forward motion either into bypassing it or flipping or rolling together. So in, a metaphor for life is coming at you. You don't get to decide what's coming at you, and you have to then respond and react to that force to transmute it, keep yourself safe. Is that accurate?
Yes. The idea is that you step away slightly or step back and allow for that momentum to come. And then you take that, whatever is coming. If you can step away completely, that's ideal, right? But if you can, then you just take it and you move across. So you almost like step away and let's say by pulling the hand, you then circle around you, because that's how you can redirect the momentum, and person gets out of balance. So it's about spiraling and seeing where the weight will fall. So you're looking to create disbalance while yourself maintaining grounding.
I think where I was leading, so that people can understand it, and a little bit I think about Neo from the Matrix with the bullets. He's like, time slows down a little bit, and this connects to what you were saying about fear. If you're in a feared state and someone is rushing towards you, you don't have an instinct, right? It's not a logical set of decisions that you need to make to say, oh, if this person is coming, then I see this angle. There's something happening very, very quickly in our processing to know where to move. And it's almost beyond the rational mind. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Shopify.
Starting something new isn't just hard, it can be downright terrifying. So much time and effort goes into this thing in the pre-planning phase, you're not even entirely sure it'll work out. It can be hard to make that leap of faith. Trust us, we know. When we started this podcast, we weren't even sure what we're doing. What if no one wants to be a guest? What if no one listens? What if I make a fool of myself? Now we know we were right in believing in ourselves, despite our fears and hesitations. It also helps when you have a partner like Shopify on your side to help, like we do. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world. 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., from household names to first-time business owners just getting started to a little podcast like Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. Shopify's been our one-stop shop for all of our merch store needs for the past few years now. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. Accelerate your efficiency, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify's packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/breakdown. Go to shopify.com/breakdown.
That's shopify.com/breakdown. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by IQ Bar, our exclusive snack, hydration, and coffee sponsor.
IQ Bar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe mushroom coffees are the delicious low-sugar brain and body fuel you need to win your day. The new year means a clean slate, time to transform frustration into fuel and power your day with IQ Bar. The Ultimate Sampler Pack's a great way to try all IQ Bar products and flavors. You get 9 IQ Bars, 8 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified and entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. When we got the Ultimate Sampler Pack, I instantly reached for the coconut chip, and that's still the one that I reach for. The bars taste great, but the real benefit is how they make you feel. Jonathan loves to put an IQ bar in every pocket that he has so that he can grab one anytime he has the need to satisfy hunger with no sugar crash, and they're super easy to take everywhere you go. Right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the Ultimate Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. That's BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Can we learn to anticipate things that we previously thought we could not? Is there a set of skills that is innate to all of us that we simply need to hone? I mean, what you're describing is any complicated conversation, right? If someone is coming at you and you receive that with an equal and opposite force, that actually is not the way towards harmony. That's the way towards conflict. So what you're talking about is really, it sounds like, a metaphor for human interaction. Where do I step out of the way and let this person's momentum pass me by? What does it mean about me being able to hone the ability to understand energetic movement?
Yes. So it's about expectation, right? And seeing how can we anticipate? So I guess if we're taking analogy of Aikido, is we are looking at being open to whatever is coming, having no expectation, and also being open to open to the environmental signals. So, and then whatever comes, you are allowing it to be, which is very much a lot of Eastern, Taoism and Buddhism. It's allowing for the flow to take its place, and you find the place where you belong, and in your qualities. So it always observation first. And so when we are coming with an agenda to a conversation, or wanting a particular outcome, then we are almost like not allowing the field to unfold. When we have concern or fear or stress, we call it tunnel vision in a pilot kind of sense, or people working in extreme environments, or sports people as well. And then when we're in a tunnel vision, it specifically narrows us to survive, really. So to actually put our most critical tasks to the muscles, but not to the brain. So what we want to do is to stay open and relaxed. And that only happens when we feel comfortable in ourselves, or comfortable in the situation, or comfortable for things to change.
Yeah, that also sounds eerily similar to the way we are instructed to learn to drop into a meditative state or a state of altered consciousness, right? These are the same kind of things. I mean, tunnel vision also happens in trauma, right? And learning to kind of expand that out. So it seems that, you do so many different things, but there is this thread, right, of kind of our state of awareness, consciousness, and perception.
Yes, beautiful.
In Aikido also, and in other martial arts, we can begin to sense even behind us what isn't there. So we're not even using our eyes in a way. And other athletes, I've had this experience. You're just in the right spot at the right time, not even realizing how you got there. You didn't make a plan to move 4 feet to the right, but that's exactly where you need to be in order to do the next move. Can you talk a little bit about what intellect is living in the muscle that's allowing us to be there where we need to be, or sensing behind us?
I wish I knew the answer. And but the only way that I was tapping into that is through doing this method, which is called iView Expert, or what I learned it from two brilliant scientists, Dr. Mary Omedy and Dr. Jim McLennan in Australia, where they were studying decision making in firefighters. Well, they were faced with a problem where the Australian fires, bushfires, like you do have also in California, they spread very quickly, and you need to anticipate and know what to do, or when to pull people out, especially if it touches living structures. Some of them were really good firefighters, and some would just, literally seconds before, pull the entire crew out of the building before it loses its structural capacity. And how do they know that? How do they know that? Because, they could have stayed there literally a second later, and not only not been able to get what they were, I guess, looking for, but they will also lose the crew. So, and when they were doing retrospective interview, which is what we had for a long time in studying decision making and understanding how to teach others, is that when we're faced with other people, we start putting on filters. So I'm speaking with you, and I have my understanding, who's sitting in front of me, maybe what you know, or what I think you might be interested in, or who will be watching this. Me not going too far out of what I know, all of these little things that I don't filter, but they are actually veils that are happening. But if I was, for example, describing me, I don't know, cooking, let's say, something very simple, and it's something I do fast, some pancakes or something like that, and you don't measure afterwards, and you just anticipate the texture and anticipate how it should flow and when to flip the pancake, and when you can actually flip it and when you don't want to try it, and things like that. So then in that flow, when I'm describing it to, let's say, children or to a friend, it would be very different. Or if I am, let's say, deciding to doing a teaching video or describing it to someone who doesn't speak the same language. And that would completely kind of change what I say. So in firefighters, when they were describing it, they were filtering it by the researcher who was in front of them. So they're not firefighters. They have no idea what it is to be in that environment. They have no idea the terminology they use, and they have no idea. Well, they don't appreciate the danger, if it makes sense. Not that necessarily, that person would elevate themselves, that they are, superior in any capacity, but so they're being gentle, careful in how they describe, and hence we lost loads of information because they just can't articulate it. So what they've come up with is that to use a footage from the head-mounted camera that will be on the eye level, and they would put it under all of their equipment, which is heat protection and, of course, eye protection. And they would record everything that was happening. And as soon as they came out, and that would be usually training scenarios, they will debrief them by watching the video. And when the person is watching from their own point of view, it's like observer's point of view. And when there is no external view imposed on us, we suddenly remove a lot of filters. So we don't feel that we're being watched, and we're literally describing what we're looking at. And suddenly all these veils fell off in terms of, and they're just saying what they're seeing, and we don't need to cue them because our capacity to ask is limited by what we think we need to know. But the whole idea is that we find out what we don't know, but we can't ask the right question. So by having those cues, but also by then learning their terminology, and the more you talk, and that's why I learned to be a pilot, so I have that kind of inner perception of what else I'm looking at and what else they don't need to filter that I don't understand the terminology, or I don't understand where they are, what they're doing, and what they're going to do next. And that allowed to find out in this firefighter's situation is that they actually lift the protection, that the heat protection from the ears, and they listen to the sound and the wind, the temperature that they sense with their ear. So as soon as there's change in temperature and wind flow, they do a certain action. And that's something they should not do. And they don't, of course, teach newbies, if you wish, because that's dangerous, because that's removing protection. So they would never share that, but the experienced people would do that. And that's something they don't even think about saying. So the idea is, and this is that professional intuition that the people don't even realize that they're doing it. And they only remember doing that by, let's say, they would see the flip of their hand, and they'd say, well, what did you do? And they would say, well, I did. And how did you know? Well, I felt. And so how did you feel? And it's that non-judgmental questions that allow just descriptive language and encouragement. And what I found out that people will talk for 5 minutes with a 5-second footage of what actually went through their head.
So this opens up, kind of a different set of questions that you're also, really competent to speak to. What you're describing is things that we may not even realize that we're doing that change the perception, really, of the world. So one of the things you talk about with pilots, this notion of spherical awareness, right? That pilots are experiencing space and effectively time, right, in a different way than we are. They're not just sort of thinking forward facing, right? They're seeing and sensing in all these different dimensions. Jonathan and I are particularly interested in different kinds of perception. And what does it mean also to try and put words to some of these kind of phenomenal differences in perception? I wonder if you can use synesthesia as a good way in for us. We've talked about synesthesia as we've had many interesting conversations about acquired synesthesia after a near-death experience. Elizabeth Crone is someone who had a near-death experience, and one of the abilities she came back with was synesthesia. But you've talked about synesthesia as a model for kind of expanded perception. Can you talk about really kind of what it is and what the varieties are and what it can tell us sort of about the human capacity, right, for perceiving things that many of us think are much simpler than they are?
Yes. So synesthesia is extraordinary ability to perceive like a cross-modal sensory perception, where it allows you to hear things, but let's say recognize them as color, or see things and feel them in your stomach. And there was a beautiful example of somebody cooking a chicken, and I think they put something pointy into the chicken, and they said, "What? It's 5 points." And says, what does that mean? That needs another 2 points to cook. But for them, it's that sensation of putting it through the chicken, and also the aroma that came out as they were doing that. And I don't know, all other perception that it says that he could feel inside the body of that it's ready or not, and that's all I've got, so like I couldn't pick up of, and the chicken was perfect every time. But it wasn't, I tried, you try to repeat, but because you don't have that experience, but you're trying, I'm interested to perceive to see if I can get into it, but I clearly don't have that cross-sensory perception like that.
Most people think of synesthesia as sort of also, with LSD, you get this sort of crossing of modalities. But what you're saying is that synesthesia is any crossed modality. So it could be that sensation. Is this similar to, when people get an ick feeling when they look at certain things? Is that also a form of a difference in perception?
You and your neuroscience background, we classically have so many perceptions that are listed in the book, that we teach in biology and in psychology. But actually, we can sense, temperature, we can sense humidity. We've got, kinesthetic sense. We've got the, with our inner ear, variety of sensory perceptions. And so all of that, for some reason, we discount as sensors. But we navigate with them, especially in martial art or in any sports that we do. And, when you're juggling 2 children as well.
Well, I was just going to say, these are all times also of, kind of heightened hormonal and endorphin situations, right? A lot of the behavior of new mothers can look very, very much like certain kinds of obsessive compulsive disorder because there's this extreme focus, right? So, and these are all physiologically regulated. So I guess my sort of follow-up question is, what can you offer us regarding abilities that we don't experience with our 5 senses? Synesthesia obviously is based in many of the modalities that many of us acknowledge are concrete or discrete. But there are people who report incredible ability to receive information, to intuit things. We've recently been discussing, not just clairvoyance, but, clairaudience and clairsentience and all the clairs, as I call them. These are opening us up into a conversation of there are things that exist that we may not even be able to measure yet, but that strongly influence our behavior and our perception of the world. What can you sort of offer us to understand that kind of perception?
So I am interested in that perception, in that cross modality, as cues that we pick up. But what I was trying to do in the research is I was trying for people to articulate what they sense and where that information comes from. And a lot of the times, the problem that we have is that the people I work with work in safety critical environment. So they are cautious to say that I've intuited that, I knew that. So they would, that's the filter that they will try to justify to appear scientific or safe or appropriate. And we're working through that in the field, but what it feels like, it's a logic coming in rather than what has actually been happening. And when it comes to saving people's lives, then there is this tension that we have. Like, I worked with surgeons and people who do very critical diagnostics in the medical field, and they could make a mistake, but equally they could save people's lives. And what is interesting in the outcomes is that there was a study, I believe in Boston, where the surgeons who attended regular art exhibits, they had a better patient outcome overall. So, which is interesting. So, but I don't believe that there was a conclusion whether it was just, let's say, relaxation or interest in art, let's say, having that time to be off, or the link that was being made that they were more observant and more abstract field of view, or not field of view, like when they're doing surgery, they are studying surgical field and for clues to come up. And of course, well, not of course, but I didn't realize how different we all are inside, how actually, the liver, our internal organs are not quite the same, and they are very different inside. It's like, looking at a completely different terrain when you're going in. And so for them to detect a minor change, even in the corner of their eye, whether it's synesthesia or not, they would not put it to that. When they will be describing it to a student. And that's why it's not helpful to study their intuitive decision making or transfer expertise if it's a teaching scenario. But if they're doing it themselves and they are feeling that this is, a discovery journey, and of course they will only be comfortable doing that on a successful outcome, because otherwise, you don't know, they're opening themselves up for problems as experts. So I feel like I keep diverting from your question about this extrasensory perception, but I guess I was trying to tap into it as the science would allow. And my best understanding is that people all experts that I work with, they try to justify it. They would not give it out to intuition. And I thought that was interesting, that I could see that they were just like pilots, for example. They said, I would ask them, where did you get that information? And I knew they didn't get it in flight. They intuited the number, literally intuited the number. That was not in flight, and they were convinced they did that because they had to justify of how they knew that information. But when we both looked back, we all were surprised, that they actually knew the data that wasn't there, and nobody had an answer to that, and no explanation. And but I couldn't touch it in my in my scientific approach. I couldn't touch that with a scientific method, apart from allowing to articulate people something that they didn't realize they do, and using that footage then to transfer that expertise to another experts who have done that operation but never done it like that. And what we found is that the surgeons were doing things that were not permitted, but were typically not a procedure. And they almost didn't realize they'd done it that way, but it was like a new shortcut that they've developed to allow them to either have a better outcome or quicker outcome, or a new trick, which we know that the outliers, that are the way that you don't do, become like a new procedure and a new innovation. But I found that they work in such a tight frame where, in a sense, we want innovation, but we don't allow the intuitive knowing to percolate because it's not safe, and they have to do all sorts of procedures which occupy your intuitive mind. Do you remember, like, if you worry about things, you don't have that field of view and perception that allows it for you to create and to intuit it through your other perceptual sensors.
I mean, very hard to not be worried when you're navigating someone's internal cavity and messing with their organs.
Well, that's their day-to-day thing. I mean, it's extraordinary, what they do, and then, go on to their regular day. I mean, I found this very humbling.
Something that's come to a lot of people's attention, this notion of telepathy and communicating on, I guess, a non-localized plane of consciousness. Many of us were, kind of captivated by the telepathy tapes and, arguably a lot of anecdotal reports and a lot of, questions as well about the use of facilitated communication, which I usually like to set aside since there's a lot of complexity and controversy surrounding facilitated communication. But suffice it to say, there are many ways that people who are non-speaking can communicate at various levels of cognitive functioning. And so we know that that exists, but what is your take on this notion that one of the untapped abilities that many of us have involve accessing information that exists in a plane that apparently we can learn to access, but most of us don't on a daily basis?
Well, I think it's also something that we believe, grow up starting to believe that it's not possible. For example, I have that, with children and friends, and that where, you text them and they know, right? That you said, well, I was just thinking of you, or they will call you and you were thinking of them. And Rupert Sheldrake, popularized that in his book. I think was it 7 Experiments That Will Change the World, or something like that, where he talks about the common knowing that you know who will call you, and the pets know when you're coming home. And we all come across that phenomenon. We cannot deny it. Or when somebody's looking at you directly, or even through the camera, through the surveillance camera, and you would know. So that's why they put a person, in surveillance room in some places, because there is an eye perception rather than just cameras that are capturing everything anyway, and now can be detected automatically. So I personally experienced that. I cannot deny it. I have that, intuition and knowing so many times that it's just impossible to not look. I have not worked with people who are non-speakers, but I'm delighted that, Kai Dickens has, I love her quote that she put on the website is assume competence. And I think it's such a strong thing to come in, like to have it in our vocabulary, that wherever you go in, like when you go in to talk to children, assume competence, or you go into the shop, you are talking to anyone, just assume competence. You just have no idea where people come from, what their walk of life is. And you just don't know. Maybe they are telepathic, equally so. And what I found very interesting, that people's response when they realize that other people can read the mind, especially children and adults like non-speakers, it's frightening for some people, that they feel that, that our mind will be read. And I think that's such a beautiful wake-up call for all of us to start clearing that space, of whatever comes into our perception. I grew up with almost becoming, I wanted to level with the ground if I would think a bad thought, because I would feel as if somebody ever heard what I think right now. I just don't want to exist at all. So for me, I don't know where that come from, but for me, a culture of thought, that's how I termed it for me, was so important. And I knew somewhere inside that if I think bad, I would never have any abilities whatsoever. Because if I, with my mind, can imagine something and it could come true, and if that's what Eastern masters, are thinking and they're able to make it true, what if I think something bad, and I inflict it on somebody else? So somewhere very early on in this very preteen, martial art, it really dawned on me that we have a power of thought and that we can change our environment, affect other people just by thinking or even breathing. If we breathe a certain way, we can puncture somebody's, internal organs by, directing this chi in a certain way and throwing them across the room, no matter what your size is. And I just thought, if we've got this capacity, we have to harness it. So I grew up with that awareness that it's possible. And I wanted to go to science to pursue that, but I was not allowed to touch it, if you wish. But what I'm seeing is that people who do work in extreme environments and people who I come across who work in the military, they thrive with that ability, and they're known for that people will respect and follow their advice because there is no other intuitive perception. Or like I know now several cases from mothers that intuited something and they heard the baby say something and they would run and then find it that the dog, which was safe, but dragged the baby where the baby didn't want it to be, on the carpet, for example. So these like little intuitions. So when you wake up in the night and, you come to the baby and you came just on time, or, having that urge in the night and you would wake up at the same time when the baby, needed assistance or something like that. I don't know where that comes from, but I've experienced that. So I think it's beautiful that we're touching that. But what I'm hoping that this telepathy tapes is actually changing us as human beings and making us consider what we think in the first place, what we think every day. Let us go down with embarrassment of what we do think, and let that be our, morning thought. What if somebody is reading my thoughts? What if, somebody can act or something will change given my thoughts?
Yeah, I think a follow-up question is what can change, right? If we're paying attention to those kinds of thoughts. We've, spoken to Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza and, people who really believe that, manifesting, right? Positive affirmations, that those things are not just lip service, that they can actually change the physiology, right, of our bodies. So by the same token, if we can imagine ourselves into more health, more openness, more positivity, it would absolutely follow that thinking negatively can spiral us into pain, discomfort, suffering, and maybe even disease.
Yeah, so the Dr. Lipton talking about the environment, affecting the cells. And I think that's a beautiful example. And I think everyone can imagine when we are in a setting, when we're in a meeting and somebody comes in and there's an air about them. And the room either like goes into silence because you feel, I don't know, the tremor that something, will happen, or somebody comes in and it's just like a light, like the mood lifts and suddenly people exhale and relax. And we know the Heart Math Institute as well. They look into heart-brain coherence, and by breathing and also aligning with, which is in a way like biofeedback, they say that they could measure how far the field extends and that we bounce almost into each other and cross these bubbles of our electromagnetic field, which we do know because in medicine we use magnetic measuring of, our brain and heart. So it's not far off to say that how we feel affects other people. And it's just like when you come in and the pet meets you, or a child runs into your arms, or a partner or somebody you deeply respect smiles, and your day has changes, and suddenly everything goes well. So where does that come from? Is that because of our state, or is that the environment responding to us? And I certainly know that when I come in, and if I don't change my attitude, the day will go very differently. So whatever that may be, whether it's an energetic effect, or my human doing and being, an attitude in terms of our perception. So even on physiology level, we understand if we worry, we can't perceive things. So which means we won't notice nice things or good things that could change us. And also we have something called selective perception, which is kind of the science touches all of this, right? We can almost like circle around it, but we can't explain it. And our selective attention, that famous experiment of the person in the monkey suit, a gorilla suit, coming across the screen, and people are playing, passing basketball in white t-shirts. And if we are focusing on how many times the ball was passed between people in white t-shirts, nobody sees somebody coming to the middle of the screen and then walking past. And that is selective attention. So what else are we not seeing? So, and that's also interesting. So I think I'm not trying to trail back from our extrasensory perception and intuition. I'm just saying that we are only starting to pick up with science, and we should maintain curiosity to keep going. And like, Dispenza, Joe Dispenza, has thousands of examples, happening right there, in a regular, regular intervals, if you wish, during the events when people, they needed that moment of belief and that moment of clarity and relaxation. And we know if we just go for a walk, the problem solves in our head. If as soon as we let go, the opportunity opens, the perceptual capacity, be it intuition, better logic, our better oxygenation and clarity. But to me, it's dropping that state, whatever that is, to allow the perception to be better, be it physiological or intuitive, doesn't matter. The whole point is fine-tuning. Where do you feel it? And the idea is to notice, to sort of almost be realistic in the expectation. So not in our own exploration and investigation, to say, oh, I actually knew that a split second before. So let me write it down, so that my brain, that's been trained scientifically not to consider this as a possibility, I actually did know. It didn't happen after. It happened before. And by extending that time and allowing our brain to walk that path, or our mind to be convinced more often, we allow that possibility that we have that ability.
What is coincidence? Because you've mentioned it, a few times in different ways. Synchronicity, can there sometimes just be coincidence? And it could just be a different worldview. I've definitely had instances. It happened just yesterday, Jonathan. I was thinking about your son, and literally the next second you said, my son is calling, let me call you right back. And I said to my son, who was in the room, I was just thinking about Jonathan's son, and he called, and my son said to me, no, I was thinking about his son. And I thought, what is happening? So my son was saying that he and I shared a thought about Jonathan's son, and then Jonathan's son called.
And the question is, did you share a thought about him because he was about to call, or did your sharing a thought make him call me?
Did my son give me the thought about your son?
Probably.
Did
yes.
I give it to him? Like, what's going on?
I think he gave it to you because you're constantly scanning Fred to see what he's going to do. So I would more suggest that it was that way than him getting it from you.
But for me, I don't know that that changes my worldview, meaning I think like that's a coincidence. But what is coincidence to you? And what would an expanded definition of coincidence be if we were in more of a dropped in place?
Yeah, I like that. And there's a beautiful book, and I don't think there's only one now, but I think it's called Synchronicities and Coincidences. And there's types of them. I feel like we can almost expect them backwards, or I don't know, analyze, allow them to be meaningful when we analyze our life path backwards or situation backwards. But the more we are open to say, and this is again, going back to Aikido or Hapkido, which is a similar approach, is that when we are open to options, we can see several paths. So it's like standing on a crossing. And then we are perceptive to the next clue, that almost like a shortcut to whatever we want it to be. So it's having an intention, having a plan, doing an action, but not being set on the path. And then that coincidence happens, which allows us to say, I feel like it's the universe, playing to see if we are watching. This is my my take on it, and I don't have other words to explain it. But to me, synchronicity is so like a coincidence. It's almost a discounting of taking the power out of it. But synchronicity to me is that things come synchronized with, I guess, with our vibration, if you wish, with our expectation, with our mood, with our tone, with our perception, and then something opens up in the field. This doesn't necessarily explains, the children calling and us knowing, but we are thinking of them in a sense that, I don't know, we had a closer proximity. And if you wish, if there was an electromagnetic fine-tuning, maybe it's like, quantum particles.
You're being appropriately evasive, but I want to emphasize, you just mentioned a field, right?
Yes,
you
absolutely.
just mentioned thought having power, right, outside of it existing in a localized place, namely, this is what I'm thinking, right? What is that implication? And, don't be afraid to go there, because Jonathan goes there all the time and I try and follow him. What is the implication if thought is something that exists in a field?
Yeah, so I don't have scientific explanation for it. So I can only talk about from experience and observation. And that's why I feel that our experience and applied research, which is what I'm interested in, is through observation, making a connection and allowing us to learn from it without explaining it too much. Because once we start explaining, we're losing the ability, because our mind starts to doubt that it's not possible. So I allow to say, well, when you last time were, observing instruments, or when you were last time, looking this way, but felt it that way, how did that feel? And, what action happened? So, and then bringing that into training situation and to construct similar possibilities where the people can learn the internal signals that, you could call it synesthesia, because sometimes people don't realize that they're synesthetes, right? And there are like more than 150 combination of types of pairings that could happen.
More than 150? How?
Yeah, I don't know. But if you go to the website for synesthesia, they say it's 152 or something last time I looked of what that could be, because it's not just two, perceptual channels that they could mix. And if people have one type, they very likely to have other. So, for example, we have a friend who is an absolutely magnificent and talented composer. And so he can see music. So he sees shapes and he sees colors. And what's coming first, the music or colors or shapes as he's writing a piece? Can't be explained. Where does that come from?
Like, what is a symphony, right? Is it wavelengths? Is it like, what did it look like to Beethoven? As you're losing your hearing and you're a composer, can you still compose, right? Without your hearing, if you are seeing the music as it's evolving. I appreciate, you acknowledging we don't have a scientific approach yet to be able to understand these things, but also like think about how many things that people thought like germs, what, that doesn't exist, and like, yes it does, right? So there's so many things. What would that look like also if we do reach an ability to scientifically measure this kind of field, this difference in perception? It would be an enormous paradigm shift for the field of science in general.
I agree, and that's why I thought to approach this from another perspective, from experiential. So we all culturally, in every culture in the world, there is an example where there are, women who support birth, for example. So we have doulas, we have people who, healers who people go to when they have nowhere else to go. When the modern medicine doesn't give you an answer. But, if you break a bone, you definitely want to go get an x-ray and get a surgeon to look if they could, put it right. But yet, for example, I'm very interested in family constellation, if you've come across that kind of...
Jonathan wants to talk to you all about it. Let's get into it. I'm just going to say right now, and I'll let you explain it, I don't buy it. I don't understand it. I can't imagine a world where Jonathan's talked about it. He's like, well, this person pretended to be my father and I got out all the things I needed to say. It would never work for me. Tell us about family constellation therapy.
Also, just for context, I've explained it to her 16 different times. We've spoken about it on the podcast.
Nope.
She still has no concept. I've invited her to join me. She's like, I can't go. Because until you experience it,
no,
it's very hard to imagine it. And once you do experience it, and this will make sense to anyone who's listening once you explain it a little bit more, but until you become a representative in a constellation and you step into the role of whatever family system the person receiving the constellation is having, and all of a sudden you don't know anything about the person in front of you, and yet you feel so intensely in your body emotions and visceral sensations that you couldn't possibly make up because there's no context for which to make them up. All of a sudden, the veil between the known and the unseen is so thin that it's frightening.
It is frightening. That I will agree with you. It's frightening. Let's let Dr. Whiteley explain it.
Absolutely. So I came into it. I'm always interested in how healers work. What is it? How do they intuit and why? There's a cue and people report being well. And, I was growing up and my mom took me to all the healers that there were. She, for some reason, thought they absolutely need to be healed. And that I was frightened by a dog, and perhaps I was, cured of that. I don't know. But, it's sort of the belief is that if the child is frightened, it will have an effect on them down the line. And so I have come across, all sorts of, usually it's women and elderly women, and sometimes they were not, I guess not that elderly looking at it now from my position.
They were 35, which seemed ancient at the time.
Yeah, totally. But they always, I felt something. I felt something being in their presence, and they would be whispering, and I would always be listening to what are they whispering? Like, what is this? And a lot of the times they would be whispering about, like, let's say, as the sunrise will set, as the sun will rise, something will happen, and as the sun will set, that will dissipate, or something. As the river flows, it will clear. Let's say, just almost like attaching the symptoms to nature. And I came across this not once, and I was, curious about it, and but it kind of remained as that. And so about is it 8 years ago, I think, I heard about family constellation, and we had a friend who came from Siberia, and she's a geneticist, and was working in Academ City, so it's like the most prestigious place for scientists in Soviet Union and Russian Federation. And she was, struck by what was happening to the science then, where they couldn't be paid, and she had to find a way to be basically find the way to income, because she was paying for science that she was not being paid, but she was paying for her own experience from her own pocket at the academic cities. So she came across this method. I don't remember what was the query, but she was very skeptical, being a geneticist and a scientist. And then she stood, and she was kind of on the outskirts, listening in. But then, ironically, when she was teaching us, and if you know, Jonathan, the background is that you generally work with generations, or what happened across generations. And she says, it dawned on me many years later that I am still working with generations, or, in a sense, with some capacity of genetics. And, let's say this is a coincidence, right? As we discussed before. But I was also in the same skeptical way when I began. And we were doing very simple exercise, and when I go in, I wanted to experience it in order for me to, in my mind, even if I can't articulate it, because that's what I'm interested, I wanted to viscerally experience it so I can tap into it. And so one of the constellation we were doing something called Approach. Jonathan, remind me the name of the founder, Bert
Hellinger.
Bert Hellinger. So he was grew up training in religion as a priest, and then he went to Africa to, share the faith. And then he came back, and that's what he brought back to Europe. And I understand that he picked this up from traditions in Africa. And part of his observation is that if family is positioned, or when they're talking to each other, that if they're positioned in a certain way, that they have a better flow of love through the family, whatever that may mean to us. He was starting to explore with that. And if you place people in a certain position, it seems to be the situation or discussion or the flow or how people feel seem to open up, or the release happens. So that physical placement. And so that's kind of one, if you wish, the element of that. But also when the idea in family constellation is that you sit down and you start talking. So there is a request that, or we're forming the intention or what the query might be. And it's actually quite pertinent to get the request right before you do a constellation. And the request is actually formed not on the question, I want, more money, or I want to resolve the conflict. Usually it starts there. Or, I don't know which house to buy, for example, could be very practical. Or, whatever that might be. But what you're going to is that you as a, master who is holding the constellation, you need to find the feeling of where it was either felt that way, something familiar. It doesn't have to be in childhood, but somewhere where you felt that either what you don't like or what you do like, depending on what your goal is for the outcome. And let's say we have a feeling that, I seem to be getting always into argument with a particular relative. And so you go to that situation where you had that feeling most viscerally right now. It could be nothing to do with the current situation that you have, but you go as earliest memory.
First or worst is what they call it.
Yeah. So, and you're going to that feeling of what you're experiencing now. When did you recall it first? And it might be almost nothing to do with that relative either. But you go to that feeling and something comes up, which in being trained as a clinical psychologist will take you years to get there. But here you get it in an instant through the feeling. So, and then the idea is that you go down to that feeling of what you're experiencing. And based on that, with the person who is holding the space for Constellation, you decide which figures you're going to put in the field. And you start with the fewest number of figures or people. And depending on what that scenario was, where you were feeling this first, you start to invite people who would be those figures. And that is done with permission. And I think that's a key too. So let's say I would come to Jonathan and I would say, Jonathan, would you be my father? And Jonathan would agree or not.
I ask him that all the time. It's not weird at all.
And so then I would, place my hands on the shoulders at the back and would go with the feeling that I'm having and place them somewhere in the room, somewhere, doesn't matter where. And it's kind of detached from the feeling. And then let's say there's a sibling and I would say, Mayim, would you please be my sibling? And that agreement is almost like a gate. It's surrender to an opportunity to be in that situation. So let's play whatever the game would be. Let's, playing a surfing game, and so you would go in the field, and then somebody would stand for me, for my own figure, and I would also ask them and then place them in the field, and then we let that field to stand, and people would be positioned in a certain way. And almost first thing that comes is that you see how we, the person who made a request or I, position the people. So will they be looking at each other, not looking at each other, whether they will be, turning or not turning to each other. But something happens and you almost feel either like you feel the surge of energy. You develop the feelings for that person whom you're looking at, and you have no precedent for it.
So how do we make sense of this? What is, I mean, I understand that we don't know scientifically, but as a scientist, how do we frame this? And I have ways, I don't know that I believe them, I have ways to frame it, but I'm curious how you view it.
I don't have an explanation. I don't even go there. Let's say, in terms of trying to explain it. From having these experiences, which was one of my very elating experiences in one of the constellations, I go to Eastern philosophy and read the people's diaries who have felt the knowing, felt the connection, felt, it's like Diana, I don't know if you know Professor Diana Pasulka, who is a professor of religious studies, and describes how saints, have these cities in Eastern tradition, or that's what also Dean Radin describes in one of his books, of these extra abilities that people have somehow once they touch the divine, if you wish. Once they believe that they are being touched by, or they feel that they are divine power themselves. And so I started reading those people's diaries of how they come to that feeling, what happened to them, what was the event, and then how does they teach others, why do people want to know? How do they describe that experience, and how do they explain? People come with very mundane things, like I feel sad, I don't know what to do with it. And then they will start talking to them and sadness would lift. And there's no psychology like I would do in a session, available to that. And it's not like in family constellation that a specific phrase was said that was never unsaid and needed to be said, which you could kind of, logically you can say, well, finally they could have looked in the mirror, I don't know. They could have, had another way of talking. But to me, they describe that there is the loving connection, the Eastern philosophy, that there is this, when you are in a state of love, perception, and acceptance, certain things start to unfold and release happens. And the people come to these teachers, to this, or people who write diaries of being with teachers, they feel this pull, but also development of qualities of love that they have not experienced before, but they were so familiar that they would start to tear up. And that feeling, almost like we were talking about that field, the word field, that that person invokes in them because they admire them. I don't know. Sometimes people don't know why, that happens, or why they're pulled to be with that person. And there's no obvious trigger of why the person feel that they've been released, cured, elated, or connected, or had this divine presence. But like a really good example, which I really like, is Ram Dass. And I'm trying to think of his Richard Alpert, right? His actual academic, well, like the name. So he was a Harvard clinical psychologist, and they eventually had LSD, and they wanted to explain what was happening with them. What was that experience? Where was that vision? What was that sensation? And so they went to Eastern traditions to see if they have an explanation in traditions. And so in one of the, I won't go into a longer story, and I encourage everyone who is listening to actually go and listen from Richard Alpert's or Ram Dass's words. But I very much can relate to his thought process as he describes it when he's meeting his guru. And so he's sitting with his guru, and his guru is telling him that things about his mother that nobody knows. He can't possibly know. So his mind goes in overdrive, trying to solve the problem. How could he possibly know? Who told him? Where did this information come from? And at some point, when he told him so many things, and also tells him in the language that he doesn't speak, so that he names it in English, the organ that the reason his mother passed away. And in this impossibility, when the mind can no longer work, something breaks open, because there was such pain and tension that he was experiencing, which is even happened the night before, which was even more pertinent. So how could he know when he never shared that with anyone? And in that tension, but I understand later what Ram Dass experiences with this person is that that person accepts everyone in who they are, no matter what they do. So it's that being in the field of acceptance. I mean, I don't have another word of love.
You're describing God. I mean, you're describing the place that people put God, that there is an entity, a power greater than yourself that is in a state of constant acceptance and love of you, right? It's that eternal parent that, that is, and I'm not saying this is necessarily my perspective, but that is our origin. It's our destiny. This is what religious traditions for thousands and thousands of years, have tried to articulate. And it has been suggested that many of these early mystical traditions from thousands and thousands of years ago, before we even have a record of, the Code of Hammurabi or the Old Testament and things like that, that predating that, there was a place, right, where people would drop into and touch that was a place of love. It was not a place of control. It was not a place of organized religion and the patriarchy and all the rules and restrictions and customs, right? It was a place of love. It's the seat of our consciousness, right? Is the larger consciousness that theoretically produced us all. And that's what so many people who have near-death experiences are talking about, people who have psychedelic experiences and are in touch with that familiar, warm, bright love, right? That unconditional love. I didn't mean to make you describe God, but you're kind of describing God.
Yes, and that's interesting. And so what I found is that in my exploration, right, and I'm not the first discoverer, as we know historically, like people experience this in many modalities. But I found that that quality, that field that we create by experiencing pieces of it through our life, and when they come together in that soup of qualities of love, when we're able to experience or touch that in this unfearful, right, unworried, open and relaxed space, something triggers, and you could say healing or realization or perception or letting go or something happens. And so the family constellation, for example, coming back to that, if there's a person who is very observant and open and not directive, actually, that they're not directing but allowing things to unfold without, because there's one big rule in family constellation that you do not say bad things about the person who is not present, right? So it's all about the idea in constellation is letting the love flow. And if it flows correctly, there's a release happens at various places. And to me, it's the person who is in the constellation experiences or is touched what they've been having a glimpse of, but they have a bitter more acceptance of that. And people who are in constellation allow them and their family to be accepted and be themselves, which is that state that we're describing, being loved unconditionally, whatever happens. And sometimes some of the situations are very horrific that we wouldn't even be able to talk about, but being accepted and feeling that, allowing that possibility to unfold and allowing that moment of experience. Sometimes in Eastern religions, what I'm observing is all that's required. It's for that little opening for the quality of love or presence of God.
The notion is not simply like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's my dad. But the notion is that when you place someone in an environment of acceptance, of openness, of that kind of care, something cracks open in them. I mean, it makes me think of also, the work that we now know to do with people who are in a coma, with people who have different mental capacity than other people, with senior citizens that, in many aspects of our culture, right, are just kind of put away somewhere where we don't have to look at them. It changes the way we think about possibility, not just when we do different modalities, but when we show that we are connected, that we have acceptance, that we have care. Love then becomes this universal language, like, truly, right? And for many people, they would say God is that universal language, which, is not that far off from a lot of the sort of quantum explanations and all the, astrophysics explanations of the foundations of the universe. That's what came before.
I have a very simple example of a constellation that I experienced that really stuck with me because of how simple it was. It was a woman who was struggling with procrastination. And you were like, well, that's a fairly mundane thing. You should look at all the self-help about how to not procrastinate. But she couldn't get over this perpetual procrastination, and it was affecting getting jobs and executing jobs and being, available to her life. And what unfolded was a sense of anger that she experiences internally when she procrastinates and then bumps up against the repercussions of that procrastination. In the constellation that played out, her father had this unresolved, very intense anger that she unknowingly held and then expressed in her own way. It was like these mirrored systems that often unfold without us even realizing that the thing that we're holding is a reflection of some other part or lineage of our family. And what's fascinating to me about how this often happens is that with the acceptance, with acknowledging, it doesn't have to be, oh, Dad, this is yours and I'm, at blame, but it's more, seeing that, having acceptance for him, having love towards him and the pain that he was carrying allowed her to say, I don't need to hold this for you. I don't need to hold it as a representation of being connected to you. I can be connected to you in a way that is honoring of who you are and the pain you've had, but I can choose to do something differently. And then it began to shift.
It's extraordinary things happen. And, I witnessed and, in disbelief as well on what I said and how it impacted others, having not known any facts, but you just feel it and trusting, not trying to put it through my logical senses of where I could know this. Is this the right thing to say? How are they going to be affected? So if we stop those veils and percolations that our mind tries to bury, we can actually have those synchronicities more often, because we're not discounting them. We're not discounting that monkey walking across the screen among the white, but that's what it is. And to me, it feels that feeling those qualities, when the more we are in that state, which is a happy place, if you wish, the more, which is what people in extreme environments describe. They love it, and when they thrive and everything goes, to plan, it's about excitement to be able to do it.
And I think also that openness, right? When you say like, oh, why does this only happen for other people and not for me? When someone is open to that, their proscenium then opens up. They're open to seeing more patterns, seeing more coincidences. Then they form a yoga studio. Then it's a cult. Different story. But I want to go into kind of a related field that obviously you're an expert in, and it directly relates to born knowing, how children awaken the sacred in everyday parenting. This probably happens to more people than want to admit it or talk about it, for the same reason that the astronauts didn't want to say, I don't know, I just had an intuitive sense. There are reports of people communicating with their babies before the baby is born. I have a hard time with this, but Jonathan would like to tell about what happened in his womb when his then wife was carrying their baby.
This is before conception. You should be talking to the baby spirit. What do you mean?
Oh, I'm
womb?
sorry.
How do you know what baby to get if you don't send out an application process? But no, I know several people who believe and have experience of dreams, thoughts, a sense, a knowing of that there is a spirit that will come to them as a child and starting to get familiar with that.
So wait, hold on a second. But if I'm going to enter this conversation, what we're talking about is that I'm going to go ahead and go there. There's a field, there's a quantum field, there's a place where information exists, souls exist, consciousness exists, and there are, I don't know, souls waiting to be born, and their consciousness exists and they can be communicated. We don't need words. Why would I even care that it's an infant fetus? It doesn't need words. And you can communicate with that because it exists like anyone else's consciousness exists. Is that the idea?
Well, I think back to our conversation with Buddha Betty when she talks about her near-death experience and being in a place where then she saw the choices she made to come back to Earth. And she was in this decision mode. She had technically died and she was deciding, do I come back to Earth in my current form or do I start again? And she was shown...
She was seeing a place where souls essentially are choosing their bodies, is what she experienced.
I imagine it like there's just all these little portals that have little water slides. And above the water slide, there's like a grid, and we're like, this is the person that you're going to, and this is where they live, and this is what your life might be like. And you're like, I'm going to go down the water slide or not.
But what if there is no time component?
No, there's probably this is another quality to these interactions.
When was your communication, Jonathan, though? And then we'll let Dr. Whiteley explain sort of what her understanding is.
I mean, my communication, I was kind of kicking and screaming with resistance because my then wife was a few years older than me, and she was like, I feel this baby. And I was like, this is not a time for us to have a baby. And so it was like an awareness through her experience more so than me directly. And, but she would talk about like feeling the presence of this, this being wanting to arrive.
I have a website that I've created. I was inspired by the website that they have called Last Words. So she is a linguist herself, and she's collaborating with Raymond Moody. I don't know if you come across Raymond Moody.
Yeah.
Yes. So she's her experience is that her father was communicating last words, and so he became very lucid and were talking about this divide, of seeing into some other dimension. And so she started collecting. So she made a website and allowed people to submit their stories of when they were having communications with their relatives or whoever they came in contact before they were crossing. And she collects this beautiful book. I highly recommend going either on the website or look at the book called Last Words. And there is a collection of what people experience in terms of what's coming or who is there. And there are things that they would know that they shouldn't have known, if you wish. There were some equally like with the experiences when people considered to be that physically they died, but they, let's say they're in the experience. I think it was North Carolina where they did the experiments, and they put something on top of the cupboards or somewhere else where they could see objects, and so they were somehow had a different perception. But if you look at Dean Radin experiments, it's sort of like, did they know this before? Who was seeing it and when they were seeing it, it's not clear in this time perception aspect. But so that intuited me, or that inspired me to create a website, which is sitting there as an option. It's called childbirthvisions.com. And it's exactly that. What Jonathan is describing is that I started to collect stories. Like there is a little form that people can submit. And there are a few stories that people who submitted were allowing me to share about how they've met the baby or had intuited something about the baby that would come, and how that matched. In some cases, there's no way of, matching it, if you wish, because it's all retrospective. But I'm interested, in people's experiences, because as we know in science, until we have data points, there is nothing we can do. So it's all anecdotes until we have enough data points, that we can explore. So I'm interested in these in similar way, like in Last Words, on what the story how it would unfold through other people's stories. So this is just a placeholder to inspire other people, to report what they experience if it's such so. So there's a few stories to read about it as well.
You've spoken to and worked with astronauts, cosmonauts, pilots. We all know, and if you have seen Age of Disclosure, the new documentary that came out.
Gary Nolan is part of that, and Luis Elizondo.
Who we've spoken to both of them.
We know that there are things that in particular pilots are in certain positions to be able to view in different ways and to track. In terms of your experience working with not just pilots, but people who are traveling to the outer dimensions, right, of kind of our conscious space, are there experiences that astronauts are also possibly afraid to talk about in the same way that they're maybe reticent to talk about intuition or other kinds of perception? Are there things that you have a view of when you are in space that might indicate something about some of these anomalous phenomenon?
So I don't have a report to say, which, me backing out of the direct answer. The reason I end up touching this field and interacting with people like Ryan Graves, who bravely, supporting his colleagues and pilots in America. It's called ASA, so American for Safe Airspace. And initially he started a subgroup of experts in American Institute for Aeronautic and Astronautics, so AISS, and they have a group for UAP outreach, which the whole organization has over 40,000 aviation and airspace professionals, from pilots to engineers, anybody who works in that domain. And he set up a volunteer group, and I also was contributing as a human factors experts to see of what we can, given all the perspectives, because you want to look at an elephant, from all of the perspectives that you can, and all the expertise and tools, indeed. And so we were talking with pilots and trying to understand what they were perceiving, because part of my original training was to discern what is the ghost in the cockpit. That's what people were calling things that were happening with the aircraft, where they couldn't understand why the aircraft changed the mode of operation when the automation came in first. And, we detangled that by being different design philosophy, meaning the engineer thought the plane should fly like this, but the pilot always flew it like this. So the change in logic on how the aircraft changed and what it, vertical speed versus angle of attack and whatnot, when that was become more transparent on why the aircraft was switching from one mode to another, stop having a ghost in the cockpit. But initially they couldn't understand why the modes would switch off, because it will reach an envelope of safety in it, and the pilot would not see that the aircraft is no longer doing what they set it to do. But it started as if pilots don't know what they're doing and what they're seeing, as if they're not trying, as if they're not paying attention. It's clearly a pilot error, but it wasn't. So when this came up and became more prevalent, mostly in the United States, because of the capacity of these brave individuals starting to talk up and not worrying to lose their pilot license, of considering that they're either hallucinating or imagining something, during their work hours, where they should be paying attention. And in actual fact, I wanted to see, what was it? What were they seeing? And so, because if they're seeing something out of the cockpit, and they should be paying attention on landing strip, things in the air that could be coming our way, are there air traffic that is coming in the air? So if they're being distracted, that means I am not safe as a passenger. All of my family is not safe as a passenger. And I know, and we discussed today, if the people are worried about something, they're not paying attention to something else. If they're looking out, or in fact don't want to look or don't want to see an unidentified flying object, they're not going to see other things that they should be seeing. So that, I guess, understanding wanted me to collect anecdotes, they're called anecdotes, but these are real things that people experience. And the more we can describe them, and I don't know if you come across somebody, a pilot, a helicopter pilot called Jake Barber. So last year in January, late January, he was on News Nation with Ross Coulthart describing his experience of transporting object that he not meant to know what it was. It was just a delivery, picking it up and transporting it. But when he was approaching the object, he felt an overwhelming sense of emotion, and he started crying, and he felt a feeling of elation and love, and he was describing it, and you can look at the transcript. It's a feeling of love, and he says like mother female type of love. And he actually, in that whole experience, he felt that he's not safe to fly, and he was reconsidering whether he should cut the mission short and not do the mission. And I gave a talk at Soul Foundation, which are now being published online, that are coming out sort of in sequence as they happen in November in Italy by, Gary Nolan is the founder. Jake, I describe that experience and say how important it is for us to live and embody the experience before we share it. Because if we are talking to a person who is likely not believe us, or someone that we have to convince, we're going to take out the elements that will make us perceive us less than who we are, or diminish our belief or experience. And because of that, we are missing the data and information of what people experiences in these situations. So Jake Baba was so brave, I would say, to talk about this, because he's got the guts, to share exactly what happened. And then other people start to, follow him and say, well, actually, yes, I did feel that, but I didn't feel it's manly to share that this elation and this feeling that he felt disabling, but actually later after that experience, it was empowering. So it's now empowering him to do, his, goal, mission, purpose, what he does. And he is in a way diving into that dimension. And what we're touching is love again. We're touching those qualities that he can't, the best he can explain. And the idea is to let that be part of the data, part of those experiences, part of the state that we may need to come into in order to have those extrasensory perceptions. So I don't know, I'm open to possibilities, and I think have the experiences, dive in yourself, before I, would judge. I would go and see if I can tap into it, feel it.
We've heard you describe astronaut eye, where people are seeing flashes, streaks, clouds, sometimes with their eyes closed. Can you describe what you've heard?
So this was a phenomena that was experienced by astronauts early on. And so they were not talking about this because they would be considered hallucinations, or that they would be medically unfit to fly, or they will, cut their mission short. And people in safety critical profession, they are very careful in what they report, even if it's pain, that they're going through. For example, there's a big problem of shoulder dislocation during pool training that they do to prepare for extravehicular activity. So where they wear the extravehicular activity suit in the pool, where they're training the procedure of what they do in space in microgravity. But what happens in the pool, they are not floating in the suit as they would in space. They're still working against the medium, of water. So the suit sits differently, and it affects the joints. And so some of them have injuries, but they would not report it pre-flight because they don't want to be, and also they don't want to be not perform in the pool. So, and it is, but once they start reporting, the problem can be solved. So similarly here, until the astronauts were happy enough to talk among themselves about these flashes that they were experiencing in when they had their eyes open or closed, they didn't raise this because it was then, I'm not the only one. So this is it, it's like, how can we share safely to the all expansiveness or all the spectra of all of those sensory perception or intuition or coincidences? How can we not even discount the time? When do we say that it relates to this episode? Or it doesn't, how can we also consider time component to be part of it, not just an instant? Because a lot of this UAP and phenomena to do with encountering other life forms, or how people interpret or even faith-related experiences, is that they're not always connected in one single moment. It makes sense looking at that they had other experiences that once they put together, they make sense, but they don't make sense on their own. But it's almost like building up the person to make a story. So the story is being written not in the moment, but across lifetime. So these astronauts, when they talked to each other, then started to look into what happened, and it was cosmic radiation that was actually hitting the retina that created that flash. So there was not flashes that were mysterious, but once we have enough data and we are brave enough to describe all the spectra, then we can dive in to see what it might be. So, even if it's, we don't have to boil it down to science and take the, belief and faith and love out of it, but we need to be brave to explore the whole spectra and not take out the, things that we think the other person would not understand or would not consider it important. Everything is important when we're exploring. So every detail has a significance, just like when we are, meeting somebody for the first time or making a decision on a life partner or, on a job interview, whether we want or not want to spend time with these people. And if there's this, gut sense or something is not right, it's worth investigating and exploring that and not discounting it outright. There's something in there.
Beautifully said. We very much appreciate exploring with you, and we're very excited to see what else are we not seeing as we continue to keep all our possibilities open.
And also really wanted to thank you for Born Knowing, how children awaken the sacred in everyday parenting. And also, please tell us where people can find out more about your individual and group sessions you do in terms of the breath work that you teach. Also, you have really incredible courses, Parenthood as a Spiritual Retreat. There's a Cosmic Baby Academy, which is really cool. And also want to mention your Earth Design series for newborn baby development. Where can people find out more about all of these different parts of your research and your work?
Well, the easiest is Instagram, or go to Linktree at Dr. Iya Whiteley as one word. And I use that as a sign for all of my possible, social media, but mostly on Instagram or Substack, which I'm working on developing. A lot to learn from Break It Down, right?
Yes, we're trying to learn as we go. Thank you so much, Dr. Whiteley. Really a pleasure to speak to you.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and questions.
I don't know how to operate in a world where I'm supposed to understand that like there are just baby souls floating around that I could talk to. I guess it's not fair. Like if I believe in anything else, why not that? There's no way to test that. There's no way to know. It's really like, what do you want to believe? Do you want to believe that your baby's been waiting to come into your particular life? Okay, if it makes you feel more connected to them or happier as a parent, I don't care. I don't think I don't know. Is a thing? I don't know.
There's this distinction between what is objective truth, reality, scalable across everyone, and then there is what is each of our unique experiences and how does that impact us? As Pete Holmes said in our interview with him years ago, what makes the better story? How does it make you feel?
Delusional. It makes me feel delusional. To me, that's like a delusional thought. Like that I chose my baby or I don't know. It just makes me feel not well inside.
It also makes me think of Michael Singer. Do I feel a larger connection to something or am I fighting the universe? If I feel that I didn't have a role in this child coming into my life, and not just the creation process, but even more than that, then I will be like, why the hell did I get this kid who does X, Y, and Z when it's frustrating? And I can resist and fight the process. Whereas if I'm somehow I had a larger contract to be the guardian steward of this soul and I'm able to lean into that, then how does that change my parenting when I'm frustrated? How does that change how I relate to them on a daily basis?
If that translates for people, that's amazing. And, you know, when I was pregnant, you know, in the Jewish tradition, we pray, like we pray for the welfare of that child. I sent good vibes out, I guess, to the baby. And, you know, with my second birth, which was a home birth, like it felt very, you know, like you have to kind of be locked in to this being inside of you that is trying to get out, you know? Yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious for the conversation we get to have with our breaker community about this in particular.
Does this jump the shark? Where's the line?
No, I think other things we've talked about have jumped the shark. I mean, look, if it's just about like, oh, your beliefs don't hurt me and you're allowed to have them, sure, that's fine. But I also think that like people, I don't know. I think there's a profile of people who tend to lean into these kinds of things that I don't necessarily resonate with. I would say for the most part, people that, you know, go to constellation therapy, I wouldn't imagine I would be able to understand that, which I don't.
You have a profile and sort of you have a sense of who these people are.
It's people like you.
There can be very practical, down to earth, reasonable people who go and have profound experiences that beg the question, what else aren't we seeing?
I would have to be drunk.
No, that's a horrible thing to do at a constellation.
But I can't be in my right sober mind and be like,
why? You're too scared?
But I don't know. I just don't think that I would be a person to like drop into that space of like, oh, I'm feeling it in my body. I just like don't think so.
Let's take an internet poll. How many people are like, Mayim should go to family constellation with Jonathan and we report
Just
back
the
on
two
the
of us?
experience?
The two of us? I don't want to deal with strangers. That's weird.
No, you're okay. Valerie, producer Valerie, you have to help me get Mayim this year, 2026.
I'll do it.
One of my goals is to get Mayim to a family constellation, and we will report
I'm gonna
back.
Fold my arms and have my pouty face on, see if they can break through that with their magic wand.
No one's going to pick you. You're going to get stuck in the corner and just be able to watch.
I said I can't be with other people. I freak people out. I'm going to close down their channels.
You're not going to.
They're going to, like the pilots. If they're noticing me, they should be noticing other things. I don't trust them. I should be able to walk in there naked or in a gorilla suit and have nobody notice. They should be so dialed in.
Tell us about the gorilla suit experiment, because it is a fascinating example of how we miss things that are right in front of us.
I mean, it's an example of shifted attention, and you know, we pay attention to the things that we want to pay attention to. Also, I just noticed that you put a light behind you on the wall, and I think you thought I wouldn't notice.
It's been like 5 episodes of recording. Look at your shifted attention.
Never noticed that you took that beautiful beadboard that was installed and taped a light onto it. The gorilla experiment is about shifted attention. I don't remember the specifics, but it's an experiment you're told to watch. Like, how many times does the basketball go back and forth? And if that's all you're focusing on, you don't notice that there's an artifact of a dude in a like gorilla suit who stands in the middle of the court and like bangs on his chest. And I think like the vast majority of people, like statistically significantly, don't notice the gorilla because they're not, you know, looking at the whole picture. They're specifically looking at the ball being passed back and forth, which I think all of us, you know, experience these kind of selective attention things, you know, all the time. Most notably with the red flags that we paint white in relationships. No, but often we will be pulled to something because our attention is in one direction, and we ignore glaring things. Otherwise, sometimes they are conceptual and sometimes they're literal.
It's such a good metaphor for life in so much as what else is available when we widen the aperture or we reduce the filter a little bit. Can we look around? We did a practice on the Substack community where we talked about the power of noticing, going and noticing three things that we may not have seen before. And I shared an example of I did that, and in the garden that I've in front of the house that I've lived at for over a year and a half, I noticed that there's a metal pole that sticks out of the ground like 3 inches that I never saw before.
That looks like it had been like sawed off or something. Like, how did we never notice that?
It's like there was a flagpole that got sawed off. Like, where did this come from? And while that in and of itself isn't, enormously valuable information, it's indicative.
What else are you missing?
What else am I missing that is literally right in front of me? And how does that expand? What else is happening in a social situation? What might happen? You're desperate to achieve something in life. Where are the areas that we are not consciously aware of at any given moment?
I will say, that what I was deeply moved by was her description of this place of acceptance and opening that seems to communicate with the language of love, which for anyone who is a religious person or sees God as love, it's very, very consistent with a lot of religious traditions. And if you're not a religious person, that should still speak to you and touch you somewhere, because that feeling of love, when you look into the eyes of someone who unconditionally loves you, when you have that feeling, or maybe you commune with nature that way, a pet. I mean, one of the best ways to lock into this feeling is a loving pet. That connection, right? That feeling of love, that opens something up. And I really loved how she said that. Make sure to head over to Substack. I think there'll be a lot that you'll want to check out in terms of extra content and conversation in particular about this episode. So head on over to bialikbreakdown.substack.com or get the Substack app and type in Bialik Breakdown. Make sure to join the growing Breaker community for content that you cannot and will not get anywhere except Substack. So we'll see you over on Substack. And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, we'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it down.